Right, so Israel has always counted on Arab mediators to play the cleanup crew of its wars, hasn't it? Sweeping up the debris of various failed ceasefires while Tel Aviv kept the bombs falling. But by striking Doha during negotiations and plotting hits in Cairo itself aimed at striking negotiators too, it's managed the diplomatic equivalent of torching the broom cupboard. Qatar is incensed, but it is Egypt that's actually shifted gear now. Bound to Israel by brand new gas contracts and the Camp David peace accords of several decades, Cairo was always supposed to play the safe broker. Instead, Sisi's government is dusting off an old blueprint for a Pan-Arab NATO, egged on by Iran no less, a military pact that would treat attacks on Arab sovereignty as acts of war. It's a massive pivot, the peace partner turned potential spearhead. The question now is whether Egypt can really rally Arab states into a unified force of mutual benefit, or whether this gambit's going to implode like every joint force attempt that came before it, risking Israel coming for each of them next. Right, so last week, as we know, Israeli missiles fell on the Qatari capital of Doha, a city hosting ceasefire talks. The supposed mediator's capital became a war zone. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani called the strike barbaric and treacherous terrorism, a violation of sovereignty and a direct attack on the very possibility of peace. Days later, as I covered in a video just yesterday, Egypt revealed that it too had been targeted by Israel under similar circumstances. Security services had uncovered what they said was an Israeli plot to assassinate Hamas leaders on Egyptian soil. Cairo warned that any such act would be treated as a declaration of war. 40,000 troops outside the gates of Rafah now appear to demonstrate they mean business. The message, no matter how much the apartheid blue and white states' allies might try and spin out of this, is unmistakable, therefore. Israel, in its obsession with impunity, has decided to burn the bridges of mediation itself. They do not want a ceasefire, and they don't care who knows that now. By bombing Doha and plotting against Cairo, it was not negotiating in bad faith, it was trying to kill negotiation altogether. Israel once more announces to the world that it is a rogue state. It cannot plausibly claim to want ceasefire when it's bombing the mediators. It cannot demand Arab cooperation while treating Arab capitals as expendable targets when they feel like it. For decades, Israel has exploited Arab intermediaries as shields, allowing it to wage war while maintaining the pretense of being a diplomatic country. But Doha and Cairo have revealed the farce now. Israel does not tolerate mediators, it targets them. So what do you do about that now then? Well, in response, and in addition to those 40,000 troops now apparently sitting outside the gates of Rafah, better fit they were knocking it down and getting aid in aid, but then Palestinians might enter Egypt then, of course, and Sisi won't go that far. Egypt has gambled on something else, and is on the same page as Iran, no less, in doing so. Long bound to Israel by the Camp David peace accords as Egypt is, and dependent on US aid, and now having recently signed up to be Israel's largest gas client ever, Cairo is nonetheless reviving a long mothballed project, all things considered, the creation of a Pan-Arab joint defence alliance styled on NATO, to hold Israel to account in the interest of mutual protection amongst Arab nations. Now, whether this actually comes of something this time or collapses into yet another mess of individual state interests as done before, all remains to be seen again, doesn't it? It's all a question of how much do these Arab states now see Israel as an existential threat, now that the Hasbara no longer works to cover up their crimes, and the world sees that pariah state for the pariah that it really is. Doha, if we come back to that for a moment to set the scene, was Washington's chosen ground for negotiation. Yet Israel justified the strike with its usual invocation of retaliation, as if they'd been struck first, as if bombing a mediator's capital was just another move in their cycle of vengeance. You cannot negotiate with one hand while launching missiles with the other. Yet this was Israel's play, and they've been damned for it. No hiding the optics of what they've done. Qatar was no threat to them, but Israel does whatever it likes. Therefore, the Arab Islamic Summit, which has convened in Doha since, has filled with perfectly justifiable fury. Draft resolutions warned that continued Israeli attacks on Arab capitals threatened to shatter normalization altogether. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation declared the strike a blatant violation of international law. The attack revealed Israel did not want a ceasefire, it wanted escalation and intimidation, and the destruction of any neutral table that ceasefire talks could possibly take place at. The foiled plot in Cairo only reinforces the point. Egypt was not just a mediator, it had signed up to be Israel's largest gas partner. Yet Tel Aviv, drunk on impunity, was apparently willing to treat it just like Gaza. This is why Iranian official Ali Larijani has warned Arab regimes that endless conferences with no action, a swipe at this OIC summit, were nothing but licenses for annihilation. At the very least, he argued, a joint operations room would be enough to unsettle Israel and its masters. And his point is, I think, an extremely valid one. Without some sort of deterrent, sovereignty itself cannot survive in this instance, not with a neighbour like that it is impossible to negotiate with, that does not want negotiation at all. Egypt's position, therefore, Arab NATO on one hand, Israel's biggest gas customer on the other, is riven with contradictions. But it's precisely these contradictions that actually explain its new defiance as well. There is a logic here. Back in August, Israel's Leviathan consortium signed a deal to supply Egypt with 130 billion cubic meters of gas worth $35 billion through 2040, the largest export contract in Israel's history. For Cairo, battered by economic crisis, a crisis that got President Sisi name plastered all over it, the deal was something of a lifeline. It guaranteed cheaper energy and preserved Egypt's role as an LNG hub for Europe, a gas supply for European nations being encouraged to switch away from Russian supplies in light of the Ukraine war. Therefore, on paper, this dependence should, you might think, have made Egypt far more pliant. Let's face it, that's been Sisi's position for quite some time anyway, hasn't it? But this dependency actually cuts both ways. Israel now depends on Egypt as its export corridor to flog its gas. With the ink barely dry on the contract, Tel Aviv cannot easily rip it up. It's very difficult to actually undo such a deal. It's complex as it is by either side. As such, this has actually been giving Cairo the confidence to sit in its spine a little bit. By exposing the foiled plot, warning of war if its soil is violated, moving troops to Rafah as they did last month, we aren't actually sure when Egypt exactly uncovered this plot, of course, just that they had, and proposed a Pan-Arab version of NATO. Egypt is wagering that Israel will not risk destroying its own golden goose here, and the revenues that will come from its gas getting into Europe. So here lies the paradox then. Egypt's partnership with Israel gives it leverage to confront Israel. Far from silencing Cairo, the gas deal may have actually emboldened it. By reviving the idea of a 22-member joint Arab force with rotating command and at least 20,000 Egyptian troops pledged, Cairo is repositioning itself as defender of Arab sovereignty. Where Iran offers operation rooms and militias, Egypt offers treaties and armies. Two nations here speaking up for the same thing, offering different skills and facility that you wouldn't necessarily, given Israel's relationship with both of them, to be on the same page as each other, so to speak, would you? Qatar's fury has provided the emotional and political spark for Egypt's harder line, though. Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani called the strikes treacherous and vowed there could be no leniency. And at that OIC summit, he cast the attack not as an isolated outrage, but as a precedent that endangers every Arab capital. And he's right. Nowhere is safe. If Doha can be bombed during ceasefire talks, and so can Riyadh or Abu Dhabi, and Cairo is no safer either. Qatar does not seek to lead a military alliance here. It's relied on the US for its own security for decades. It doesn't have that. And that's bitten them on the backside now a bit. Its identity is bound up with mediation and soft power, but its outrage collapses the space for complacency by others too. By branding the strike state terrorism and demanding consequences, Doha forces its fellow Arab states to reckon with the fragility of their own sovereignties, their own weaknesses here. Egypt's proposal slots into this mood quite well. Qatar's outrage supplies the legitimacy here. Cairo, the muscle. Larijani's intervention matters not because Arab regimes will adopt an Iranian model wholesale, but because it highlights the absurdity of endless meetings and summits and communiques where nothing changes, it's just all talk and then everybody goes home again. He urged governments to form at least a joint operations room, a bare minimum kind of thing, arguing even that would panic Israel's patrons. His warning was caustic, that by doing nothing, Arab regimes were signing their own death warrants. He might have done well to flash around that map of Greater Israel, like Netanyahu flashed around that cartoon bomb to the UN once upon a time to make his point. He at least would have been speaking more honestly. Egypt's proposal does differentiate itself from this Iranian model in some ways, though. Where Iran offers militias and informality, Cairo wants treaties and command structures and legitimacy under the Arab League. For Gulf monarchies anxious about Iranian influence, that distinction might prove rather crucial. Yet the tension remains. The logic is the same. Both models rest on one conclusion, and that is without deterrence, Israel will keep on crossing red lines until no Arab capital is safe. The Gulf monarchies remain the swing players even now, though. Saudi Arabia supported strong language at the Doha summit, warning that continued Israeli strikes could jeopardize normalization, yet they always say that, don't they? They dangle normalization with Israel like a carrot, but they never take the final step. It's always used as a threat. But Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's priority is his Vision 2030 project, not confrontation with Israel. He's just not interested. Riyadh will talk tough, but they won't commit troops unless forced to. The United Arab Emirates is even more compromised, normalized with Israel through the Abraham Accords and joint ventures as they are. They thrive on portraying themselves as a hub of stability. Abu Dhabi condemned the strike, but it knows a Pan-Arab NATO could make Dubai a target, even though Dubai could be just as much a target as anywhere else, as Doha has proven. Besides, they don't jump unless the Saudis do as a rule, do they? Kuwait is a bit more straightforward. Its parliament and people remain resolutely hostile to Israel, having resisted normalization altogether, don't want a bar of it. Kuwait will almost certainly endorse Egypt's plan, but its military contribution is going to be limited because it's a very small state. Oman will continue to play neutral, its customary balancing act remaining. Bahrain, dependent on Riyadh and the US Fifth Fleet for its defence, it will simply follow the Saudi lead just as the UAE will. So here lies the strategic fault line. Egypt is demanding commitment. The Gulf prefers leverage without risk, yet that has proven ineffectual. Whether Cairo can convert rhetorical fury, as has happened at this OIC summit, into tangible pledges or refocus minds on the heightened threat now posed to them all by Israel, still remains uncertain. These Gulf states seem to navel gaze like no other nation on earth, even in the face of real threat. Without Gulf money and troops, a Pan-Arab NATO looks like it's never going to get off the ground. It looks pretty hollow. They are the ones who have all the finance and the money to back this, of course. It's finding the right stick to poke them with to get them to shift. Because if Gulf states continue to sit on the fence, they risk exposing themselves to the very implosion of sovereignty that they actually fear. For Hamas, the Doha strike was vindication, though, wasn't it? How can it be seen as anything otherwise? Palestine has been attacked for years. Now, all of a sudden, a mediator state has been. And Israeli impunity has been exposed like never before. But what's actually changed with regards to Israel? Very little. It called the attack terrorism, which of course it was, and urged Arab and Islamic states to unify. It demanded sanctions and boycotts, and it insisted its ceasefire demands remain intact. From Hamas's perspective, Egypt's Pan-Arab NATO strengthens its leverage. They've a lot to gain from this, even if they have little to offer it, I suppose. But fundamentally, the more Arab states align against Israel, the less Israel can dictate terms. But Hamas also knows it risks being marginalised further, though given it's already agreed to cede sovereignty in exchange for peace, at this point, I don't think that's necessarily an obstacle with them. An alliance of states that excludes Palestinian voices, though, risks becoming just another project of the elite. Cairo has to balance state interests with Palestinian legitimacy here, because that's at the core of everything. Sisi does love to claim that they have that, even if his actions haven't convinced many of us of his conviction in that regard. But without that, a Pan-Arab NATO could implode before it begins, trapped between public expectations and regime caution. That's not to say the obstacles aren't enormous to this. Economic interdependence with Israel runs deep for Egypt, and flexing, thinking they've got leverage here with this new gas contract, that can go both ways. US leverage is a constant in the area. Arab divisions and self-servitude remains entrenched. Regimes fear instability more still than they fear Israel. Past attempts at Arab unity collapsed into irrelevance as a result of all of this. So is this time really any different? Has anything actually changed meaningfully enough that this time things will play out differently? I think it could be. Israel's overreach in Doha has torn apart the very concept of mediation to shreds. Sovereignty no longer looks secure anywhere in the Middle East. Arab publics are enraged. Leaders know that if they offer only words, then the words of others, such as Larijani's warning, will echo. They are signing licenses for their own annihilation. Their indifference may be putting their own people at risk. Their people are not going to be happy with that. The risk is that Egypt's initiative collapses under its own contradictions. So, if Gulf states remain sat on the fence, if Washington applies sufficient pressure or even incentive, knowing how some of these Gulf monarchies think, then the project could well die at birth again. That would not just be a diplomatic failure, though. It would be catastrophic because it would confirm to Israel that it can bomb Arab capitals with impunity. And that would shatter Arab credibility for a generation across the Middle East. That would be the worst case scenario here. Doing nothing or not doing enough, giving Israel license to bomb whoever they want, wherever they want, anytime they feel like it. An Arab NATO, however, would reshape the region and beyond. The United States would face a painful choice here: to back Israel unconditionally, as they do now, and potentially alienate Arab energy partners or rein in its ally. Europe, depending on Egyptian LNG as it refutes Russian supplies, would have to confront its own contradictions in that regard. BRICS powers would seize the opening, positioning themselves as allies of Arab sovereignty against Western hypocrisy. Egypt and Iran, of course, both already being BRICS nations. Ultimately, these leaders need to ask themselves, though, if their sovereignty means anything, if Israel can bomb mediators without consequence in any of their territories, does it mean anything at all anymore? Or will Arab states act collectively, finally, proving that Israel's impunity does have limits, and they've reached them? Doha and Cairo have exposed this farce. Israel is not negotiating, it is assassinating the very concept of negotiation. By targeting mediators, it's revealed itself as a rogue state, contemptuous of diplomacy and sovereignty alike. Egypt's call for a Pan-Arab NATO, with Iran backing such a call for something to shift, is therefore not a symbolic gesture, but a desperate necessity. It's the attempt to turn outrage into deterrence, dependency into leverage, and Arab disunity into a shield. Cairo may yet succeed in forging a collective defence, or it may watch the project implode once more, having been resurrected under the weight of the same old contradictions. That uncertainty is the cliffhanger. If Arab leaders act, Israel could face a deterrent it is well overdue a reckoning with. If they falter, Israel will read it as license to escalate again, and perhaps in Amman, or perhaps in Cairo itself, and successfully this time. Frankly, is anywhere off limits? Of course not. The choice for the Middle East here is deterrence or implosion. One more conference without action, and the annihilation Larijani warned of will no longer be rhetoric. It could well be proven to be the reality. For more on the story of Egypt having sent 40,000 troops to the Rafah border, already causing Israel to lose the plot, even if nothing comes of this latest call, get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you haven't done so already, so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as spreading the word and helping to support the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people. I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.